Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm not sure exactly what number session this is, but this is one of our Parent Ed series sessions, organized and programmed by our very own Rebecca. And I am going to start with our, I'm going to introduce myself, start with our land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for the day. So welcome for those of you who are new to us or joining from the public or just have not ever seen me before. I'm Ann Smith and I'm the head of school at Mildenhall Montessori Schools. And like I said, I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. Mildenhall Montessori Schools, in their physical manifestation and address, are in Adobagok, which means place of the alders in the Ojibwe language, and Toronto, which means where there are trees standing in the water in the Mohawk language. This land is uniquely situated along the Humber River watershed, which historically provided an integral connection for Aboriginal peoples between the lakeshore of Ontario and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region. This area falls within the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee people. During this time of global interaction and virtual connection and education, we are grateful to be hosting these meetings while physically being on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Possibly, given the technology that's bringing us together, some participants live and work on the traditional lands of additional First Nation peoples and have a responsibility to recognize that privilege. As a learning community that has the privilege to live and work on this land, we are required to be aware, knowledgeable, and active in the indigenization of our organization. Territory acknowledgements are just one small effort towards disrupting and dismantling colonial structures, and act in very small part to undo Indigenous erasure. Education, and perhaps most particularly Montessori education, has social power, and thus the responsibility to reflect, disrupt, and repair the ongoing effects of colonialism. Tonight, as part of our parent education series, we are so lucky to welcome Caitlin. Let me just pull up her bio here. So Caitlin has, for the last, I guess, 2 years now, been a sort of an adjunct part of our Taddle Creek family. And Caitlin is an Ontario certified teacher and founder of Sunrise Reading Solutions, which is a company dedicated to helping struggling students learn to read and spell. She's trained and certified in the Orton-Gillingham approach to I guess, teaching reading or learning reading. And Caitlin combines explicit, systematic, and multisensory instruction to help students develop the neural pathways required to improve their literacy skills. So we've been, as I mentioned, super fortunate to have Caitlin work with some of our students at Taddle Creek. And we are starting to have some discussions about how to even expand some of this work into sort of a bigger, exciting initiative. So stay tuned for that over the next couple of months. And I'm just gonna hand it over to Caitlin. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me all right? Perfect. Oh, yes. Fabulous. Okay. I thought it would be a great idea to try something new, which of course, is going to have a little bit of trial and error. But I'm going to be presenting through Canva today. So just give me a quick second. I want to make sure everybody can see. So hold on a moment. Great. Well, thank you. And everybody hopefully can hear me, but if you need me to speak up or change anything about that, I'm happy to accommodate. So just again, thank you so much for having me here for the presentation. I'm so excited to talk to you all, and just wanted to also point out we're going to be sort of leading this as a bit of a conversational piece. It's mostly my presentation, but then at the very end, I encourage you to save any questions, comments, things like that, and I'm so happy to address them after. So just to begin, as Anne had mentioned, I'm a certified teacher and I run my own practice, Sunrise Reading Solutions. I work one-on-one with students typically. And so the students who I work with usually require a greater amount of intervention in order to bridge the gap that they may have with reading and spelling. But I do also work a bit with writing. So today we're going to be talking about some of my favorite things, which is reading myth busting. So what reading is and what it is not. I'm hoping to maybe surprise everybody with some of that information so that you can then take that back to your couches and your beds. So when you're cuddling up with your kids and reading, you'll have some supports that you can use right away. We'll also be talking at the end a little bit about different benchmarks that we can look for with student success in reading and how we can set them up at different ages to be successful. And then of course we have our Q&A at the end. So the way I want to start this is a little bit unconventional. So I'm assuming, but I could definitely be wrong, but I'm assuming that most everybody here considers themselves to be an all right reader. And when it comes to reading, what's very interesting to me is that often when I give, especially students who are feeling solid in reading or parents, adults, they can see a word like this and know what it says. Now, I just want you in your head for a moment to look at this, what I call alien word. And an alien word, for the record, is a word that doesn't exist. It's nonsense. You've probably never seen it before, yet you could probably read it. So if you thought that this says frusp, I want you to give me a thumbs up or maybe a little pat on the back to yourself. Frusp. All right. Very interesting. So you've never seen this before, right? But you knew it said frusp. How about this one? I'll give you a moment to think about what you believe this says. And if you think voindy, give me a thumbs up or a little pat on the back. All right. So you guys can speak alien. This is great. Now, maybe there is a brave soul out there who wants to try reading this one out loud. If not, that's okay. We won't judge. But if there is somebody who'd like to give this a shot and you think you could read some alien, feel free to maybe raise your hand and we can unmute you.
I'll give it a go.
Okay. What do you think?
So I think it's either blipane or blipane even.
All right. And thumbs up if you guys are thinking could be one of those, right? Yeah. So if your logic or maybe your gut tells you that this says blipane, you'd be right. Doesn't mean it can't be blipane. But where I want to go with this is, how do we know what this says? We've never seen them before. And this is what I actually find pretty fascinating and a little bit mysterious about reading, which is that there are actually tons of predictable patterns that exist. So for neurotypical brains, and so for people who find reading to be pretty easy, pretty routine part of life, these patterns in text actually become so ingrained, whether or not we know why. And that's why I think a lot of you were able to read frusp and, voindy and blipane and feel like, yeah, I think I can get this. And so this is kind of a funny conversation I have with a lot of people, because when I say that there are predictable patterns in English, I'm usually met with a lot of skepticism, right? Aren't we always told English is so unpredictable? It's random, right? Don't we feel it in our bones sometimes when we look at a word and we just think, why is English this way? And I would agree that our language is unpredictable, but in the same way that astronomy felt unpredictable to the early Romans. So there actually is a lot to it that we can unlock and that we can figure out these patterns. And once we know what those are, it's a lot easier to access text and reading. But I will say, most of us, right? Everybody on this call, I'm sure, are members of different generations that did not learn the science of reading. And so as a result, I find a lot of us, myself included, kind of feel like reading just happens. So when most of us see a word, we assume we can, more or less figure it out by sounding it out or thinking of similar words or by following that gut feeling. Sometimes words just pop into your head as you read them, right? Like the alien word frusp or voindy you may have. So the reason that this is really important is because if that's how we read and we think it's kind of this, bam, you get it or you kind of sound it out and we'll get there, the results of decades and now generations of that style of picking up reading has led for us to continue and passing that along to our kids, right? We follow that sort of same assumption where with enough exposure and love and time, reading will happen, right? It's something that's going to happen and work for our kids. But the problem is it's not. Okay, I don't know if that's really a surprise for folks, but it's not working enough for our kids. And it's gotten to the point where our kids are the first generation in history to be less literate than the generation before them. This has been years in the making, right? And there's a whole other talk we could do about why this is, but the way we teach reading has a huge role to play, no shock, right, in our literacy rates. And so what I'd love to do is share what is reading and what is not reading so that we can begin to shift this paradigm at home. Okay, our teachers are already working really hard on this. It's a big conversation in education, and parents can play a huge role too. So let's start by talking about what reading or decoding words is not. So I want you to keep these points that you see in mind because in a moment we'll be studying a page of a children's book and we'll contrast some of these common sort of reading statements to the statements here. So when we talk about reading, true decoding or reading of words does not require us to take our eyes away from the word that you're reading. Just again, you might not know what this means yet, but just keep this in your mind. We do not take our eyes off. That's not what proficient readers do. That's not what we do, even if we're not aware of it. True reading also does not make you memorize words. Okay, there's over 1 million in English. I can't even imagine how huge your brain would be to have to memorize every word. So it's not a memorization process, with the exception of irregular words. Okay, so those are words you can't really sound out, like from and what. You kind of have to memorize those. Reading also does not make you guess what the word says by using images or other context clues in the sentence. Okay, so we'll return to this, but I want to take some of this knowledge and then see what happens in a really typical situation when we're reading with our kids. Okay, so if we look on the screen here, super adorable book. I also wanted to say there's nothing wrong with the books that are here, but I just wanted to sort of say that when we approach reading, especially at a young age, okay, we usually unintentionally end up promoting guessing or memorization and other compensation strategies. And so we're going to look at the very first page here, this super cute elephant, and I'm going to show you some of the common reading advice that I learned in Teachers College and probably something that you use at home too. So we're going to let go of all of our worry or our guilt if it applies to you, but I just want to see if this is really truly promoting reading or not. So here we go. We have this. I'm sure everybody can see elephant, elephant. What can you see? Right? So we might be snuggled up with our kid, their hands on the page, and we might say, okay, honey, what does this say? Right? We have this big word here. It's a whopping 8-letter word. Okay. And a child who's new to reading will almost certainly struggle to figure out what on earth this actually says. So a common piece of advice that's given is, well, look at the first letter. Maybe that's something you've said. I've said that too. And if that doesn't work and that doesn't magically make them read elephant, we might say, well, what does the word look like, right? But it kind of looks like a lot of things, right? It looks kind of like it could be element or elegant, or a young reader might even say, oh, it looks like Elle or Ellie, right? If they have a friend named that too. And then at this point, we're like, okay, they can't figure out what it looks like. So, skip it. Let's move later in the sentence. Maybe we can unlock some critical thinking skills by getting them to see what the rest of the sentence says, right? So no, not of those words, but we're going to look at the rest. And they might go, what can you see? They might read that just fine. And then we go, okay. So anyway, does that help? I think you can see where this is going. And if our kids still can't figure out that that's saying elephant, elephant, we might say, okay, just look at the picture, honey, right? What is that? That's an elephant, elephant. And then, if we reach that stage, right, we might say, you know what? If we read this every night, we go through this book, you're going to be a pro by the end of the week, right? The kids, they now know it says elephant. We read it every night. And by the end of the week, I hear this a lot, and this happened a lot, when I was back in teachers college and teaching, kids would, they'd bring a book and they'd go, this is my favorite book. I've read it every night. They can say it off the top of their heads. So this is often what we see, okay? But are they really reading? So just a reminder, let's go back and analyze this advice. True word decoding does not require the student to guess, memorize, or use context clues. So let's see how this advice stands up. Look at the first letter. That unfortunately does not give them the answer of what this word's going to be. That encourages guessing because they're kind of looking and maybe they're familiar with E is for elephant. So they might guess elephant, but that's not reading. That is guessing. And when we say things like, what does the word look like? Maybe they get it right. Maybe they've seen elephant before. And if they haven't, and we've gotten all the way to the bottom of this, they will remember that next time. Elephant, right? It's that huge long word. That's not reading, that's memorization. Right? Then we say, okay, skip it. Anyway, let's go to the end, that advice. When they go and skip later in the sentence, again, it encourages them to go back and guess based on the context or their familiarity with sentence structures and context clues. So again, it's a different skill that they're actually using, which is critical thinking. And there's a time and place for that, but it's not authentic reading. Looking at pictures. Pictures are a fabulous way to connect to the text, right? For us to be able to look and have fun and to laugh and to understand complex ideas, right? It's great for comprehension, but we shouldn't use the pictures to actually tell them what they're reading, because we'll get a little bit into it in a bit, but if you think about it, does everything we read in life have a picture? If that's how they're learning, what's going to happen when they're reading a menu? They're going to need a picture for every item, right? So another thing to mention too is if you look at this, there's a bird as well. So if we're just looking at pictures, how do we know they're not talking about what the bird can see? And then the last bit is the let's read this book together every night all week. You'll be a pro. Again, nothing wrong with reading a book a million times. I think we all have books we love. And especially when you're a kid and you're proud to read this book and to show it off, that's great. But let's not confuse that with reading, especially if there were a lot of words you had to tell them, okay? Because that would be memorization. So if you've used any of these strategies with your kids, please do not hold on to any worry or guilt. We try what we know, right? This is what we learned how to do. And what this means, if you've done any of these, it means you were snuggled up with your kids or grandkids side by side, and you're fostering their reading and creating memories together. And that's really, really special. Now, while these strategies won't really help many of our students with authentic reading, there will be many students who are just fine, right? I was one of them. This, eventually worked for me, but it wasn't because of this advice. It was because subconsciously over time, many of us pick up on those patterns that I briefly mentioned earlier, the patterns and structures in English. We pick it up eventually. And those are the same structures that you use to read Blypain, right? So rather than hoping or waiting for our kids to sort of pick up on literacy and pick up on language, we want to look at what we can do actively to promote strong and confident and authentic reading. And that's some of the tips I want to work on today. Okay, so while reading is made up of many different skills, for the purposes of tonight, we'll mostly be focused in on this strand of Dr. Hollis Scarborough's famous reading rope. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this, but when we look at the science of reading, which is a huge body of research, it's 80 plus years of research from, psychologists and educators, researchers, people who study the brain, what we find is that there's a ton of different elements that go into reading. That said, though, we could talk about it for days, so I'm just going to stick to some of the strands under word recognition. All right. So there is no denying that decoding and understanding sound letter correlations is critical to reading. Part of the reason that the ineffective strategies that we mentioned with the elephant book were so prevalent is partly due to a shift in reading and in education that happened decades ago. So for a long time, reading has been taught through the act of reading itself. That's probably something I can assume most of us have gone through when we were younger. There might have been a little bit of phonics, but there was a huge focus on, let's get books in front of kids that they love. So these are books that are relevant to them, that explore themes that are age appropriate. Nothing wrong with it, but we've used that to sort of learn to read. That's sort of been the approach, is that they'll love it and they'll read and the books are great. We celebrate. That is something we call balanced literacy. Again, it's the idea of balancing these different sort of skills, but at the end of the day, reading is for the love of it. So really wholesome, and it's I think it's well intentioned, but it's not supported by the research. And again, that research I mentioned, over 80 years, there's not much supporting this approach. And what is supported is something we call structured literacy, which some of you may have heard about. I really encourage you to look into it too. It's fascinating research. But structured literacy kind of says, well, how can students love reading if they can't read yet, if they don't know how? So we work on the mechanics first, and the mechanics allow students to open up this world of reading, which actually is something that used to exist. So many of, I know my grandparents, even great grandparents, they actually had this approach. A lot of them did. And so, it is a little bit more, how do I say it? I'm trying to think how my students would sometimes describe it. It is a little bit more rote. It is a little bit more regimented until they get to the point where, okay, we can explore any texts we desire because we can read them. We don't have to guess. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. So we're going to be really following this structured literacy idea. So one surefire way, and this is kind of our first sort of action item here, to help our kids learn the structure of English and to follow that sort of structured approach, is to control for the types of words that they're required to read. So this is because one of the very notable elements of word recognition are syllable types. So English actually has many syllable types that each determine how we pronounce the vowels inside of our words. So syllable types are what help us to consciously or subconsciously determine that T-I-M-E says time and not Tim, right? Or that B-A-C-K says back, not bake. Okay, so while I won't be going into all the different syllable types right now, it's helpful to know that they exist in varying complexities, so we can understand the graphic you see here. So this is a graphic that was put out by a great organization called BrainSpring. And what they do is they show us two different, beginning first grade texts. Okay, I'm sure your library is probably full. If you have any young kids or if you had first graders, I'm sure you had a lot of books like this, and they're so fun. Something I want you to kind of note though, because I know this is a lot of words on this slide, but if you see all of these different colored words, each represent a different syllable type. And what that means is that the vowel is being pronounced differently. So you can see there's really long, in this leveled reader, there's a lot of different colors. There's a lot of words at varying levels. Library is a really complex word to read when you're in grade 1. And so what you may, oops, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, there we go. I was just going to say, so you'll notice, of course, the diversity in these syllables. And while there's nothing actually inherently wrong, at all with this text, using this to teach reading, you can imagine, brings you right back into that sort of elephant book, right? Where they're having to kind of guess. Unless a first grader knows all of these syllable types, that's going to be really, really tricky. And when things are tricky, we compensate if they're too tricky and we don't have any strategies for them, right? So what we have is kids guessing. They're going by context. They're looking at the pictures, all these things that take their eyes off of the words and guess and memorize context clues, all of the things we know are not authentic reading. One other thing I'll mention here is, just to kind of clear this up, is that if you look at this leveled reader, do you notice all these little O's that I circled and highlighted? Each of those O's say something different. We have the O here, this is to, which the kid is supposed to know in grade 1, apparently. We have O's that say in book, O's that say ow, and O's that say ah. Like, this is stuff that our brain actually needs to be taught explicitly. And my guess is it probably hasn't happened, and it doesn't need to necessarily happen by the beginning of first grade. That's pretty wild. Now, if we look at the other side, this is what we call a controlled or decodable reader. And you may have heard of this if you know much about the sort of science of reading or some of the emerging conversations. Controlled or decodable readers take a syllable type or a concept sort of rooted in phonics and rooted in that structure, and it starts at the base level. So here you'll notice the words are blue and red. That means that the blue words all have short vowel sounds. You don't have to know what that means exactly, but the vowels are all going to sound the same. So all of the O's in the blue words are going to say ah. All right. All of the A's are going to say ah. The red words are those sight words, the high frequency words, or words that we sometimes can't sound out. But those are words that grade 1s can definitely learn. But you'll notice, right, the controlled reader is a lot simpler in that sense. And what this does is it rewires and creates those neural connections that are needed to lead to more complex reading without having to guess, right? And so when you start, hopefully start shifting the way you read at home, I want to encourage everybody to look into controlled or decodable readers. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you how we can do that. So this slide was actually made with help of some of my students. These are some books that they love, some series that they are huge fans of. All of these books look quite like other books we see and have in our libraries, but all of these books target those initial or more advanced structures of English. And so something that you can do as a parent is you can check in with your child's classroom teacher and see if there's a phonics concept that they're working on. And you don't have to know a lot about what that means, but if you check in and go, hey, is there, are they working on, 3-letter words? Are they working on a certain phonics concept? Your teacher will be able to give a little bit of context on that. And then you can go and check online and type in, decodable, and then whatever concept you're working on. And what that'll do is come up with these different stories that target that. So when your kid's reading, they will know what they're reading. They will actually have a logic to apply to go, oh, all of these O's are saying ah. And then when they're reading, they're not guessing because they're looking at the word and they're figuring it out logically. Once we've got that set, the world's your oyster, right? So I will say I'm going to be sending out to everybody. We'll probably do it through Rebecca, but I'm going to be sending out a bit of a primer on this as well that will have resources like this. So it'll be on YouTube, I believe, but we'll also make sure that you've got some of these, which many of them are free or pretty cheap to get on Amazon. All right. Now this is a bit of a continuation here. So like I said, we want to check in with our child's teachers to see if there's anything they're working on, or if there's something they've noticed that your child is already pretty good at. Because, you know, the Montessori method has a lot of fabulous, you know, ways of moving through language and building on it in a structured way. So that conversation is fabulous to have. Here I show an example, you know, if it turns out that your child is working on, you know, the AI and the AY, we call them vowel teams, they say A. If that's something your child's learning, like I said, you can then go in and look up, if you choose, stories that practice words with the AI and the AY. Anyway, so this is really, really empowering, and that's what I've seen in my practice as well. So another thing that you can do at home, so, you know, say you have a reader in front of you, maybe it's a decodable one, or a story that they really love. Something that's good to do is encouraging your child to point and sound out the words. It might be annoying and they might fight you on it. I know my students do. They don't want to always touch and say, but what happens when we have our students touch the words is we're connecting the eyes, so our, you know, our parts of the brain that actually work on vision, as well as the parts of the brain involved in movement. And we're getting our eyes, our body, and our lips and our ears all on the same thing. And, you know, there's a saying about, you know, the neurons that fire together, wire together. And it's basically this idea of the more body parts, the more multi-sensory elements we can get in, the better and faster our students will learn. So that's a great thing to do. And especially for unknown words, right? We don't want to let them guess it. Yeah. So here's a bit of an example, right? With snag, snag, and then snack. Might not always be that simple, but that's the idea. So let me move on here. Sorry, my mouse is giving me some trouble. All right. Oh, yes, of course I have to say this. So don't underestimate the power of a fun pointer. So for older students, especially those who are, you know, feeling a little bit like, oh, I don't want to point, Dollarama has some great options like little finger lights. So if you want to create, like, you know, you want to be making a fort one evening and go under there with little lights, it's a fun way to have them pointing towards the words as well, or pointers that they have at home and fidgets and things like that. Another thing to do is correcting mistakes with questions, because of course, a lot of young readers can feel very vulnerable when you're reading with them and they're making mistakes and we're going, no, remember, that's this word. And so what we want to try and do is ask questions. So if, you know, your child's reading and they say, you know, the kid sat at his desk, you might want to go, does that make sense? What this does is it helps our children, it's sort of an element of metacognition where we get them thinking about their own thinking and about their own learning, so that when they read something and it doesn't make sense, they're becoming aware of, wait, did that even make any sense? And then we can go back. So after asking, you know, your child might say, nope, like didn't make any sense, or they might go, yep. But regardless, I typically like to say, I think there was a word in there that was a little different. So let's reread this sentence to see if we could figure out which one. This isn't guessing, because this way they have to go reread, and when they get to that word, ideally they can figure it out. If not, you can help them and say, I think it's this word. Let's touch and say. Snag, snag. Another element, now this is moving a little bit away from the actual decoding, that actual reading, but another element that you can support them with at home is the comprehension piece. Now, this is great if you've got a lot of those readers at home that maybe they can't quite figure out yet. But if you read to your child, something you can do is discuss punctuation right? About what this exclamation point means and how it changes our voice. You can also help them with phrasing and, the different voices we use and the ways that we raise our voice, when we ask a question, or bring it down at the end of a sentence. Sometimes I like to get silly with my students. So I'll say, let's read it like an old man or a farmer. And that can help them, enjoy it, but also practice what it's like to speak it. We call that prosody. All right, am I good? I'm probably going to speed this up a little bit looking at the time. But I want to mention another element of reading that you can work with your kids at home with. This is the phonological awareness piece. So perhaps some of you have heard about phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, but this is actually one of the original building blocks of both reading and spelling. And it's the ability to recognize and manipulate spoken parts of sentences and words. Now, the great thing is we can actually start working on phonological awareness at really, really young age, right? As soon as our kids are talking and walking, there's actually a lot that we could do to prep them for reading. So one example is starting from the word level. This is a big one. So if we, for example, have a sentence like, I see the dog, you can ask your kid, how many words are in this sentence? This is a great way to see if they're understanding that words are these unique individual units of meaning within the sentences we speak. For really young ones, rhyming is also an element of this too. So you might say, hey, tap rhymes with map. What else rhymes with tap and map? And you could get them playing. They can come up with fake words. That's fine. You can have some fun with it. I don't know if you guys ever played I'm Going on a Picnic, but it's a really fun game where, you could do it with the family or with some friends. And you might say, I'm only bringing words on this imaginary picnic that begin with the sound B. You don't even have to say B. You could just say B. So you could say, I'm bringing a bear. And someone else might say, I'm bringing a book. And someone else says, I'm bringing a beaver. What else can you bring that starts with B? That's really good because that helps them hear the beginning sounds of words. And that's really, really important when they start to read the beginning of words. The next level is the syllable level. So you can, this is so much fun, I think, but you can practice, working through how many syllables are in words. So a lot of kids who love clapping and tapping, you could say, the word target, that has 2 beats. You don't even have to say syllables. And crocodile has 3. What about puck? And that's something you can play with your kids and get them thinking about syllables, because when they get to reading and spelling, they're going to need to be able to hear where that syllable breaks. And then, yeah, you'll see the rest on here as well, but there's a lot you could do at the syllable level. Another element of phonological awareness is the onset and rhyme. So an example of this would be saying, if I have the word pin, the first sound is P, and the rest of the word is in. So P, in, right? And if you have the word tub, what's the first sound? And they might say T. And then you'll say, well, then what's the rest of the word? Ub. Now, again, this is not where you start, right? This is we're on level 3 here. You want to make sure they're feeling good at the word level. They can do some of these exercises, and same with the syllable level. Now, this will also be included in that primer. I'll be giving you guys some different free resources that you could do and some printables to make it fun and multisensory. But don't stress if your kid can't do that quite yet. But where this leads us is to phonemic awareness. This is ultimately where we start to include print, and it's the most advanced. So phonemes are basically those individual sounds. They can be represented by different letters, but it's that many elements. So in the word cat, it would be understanding that cat has 3 sounds, k, ah, And that is something that we, want to see our first graders, especially beginning to do. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. There's many ways to practice phonemic awareness. It's so much fun. So the research is actually pretty new on this piece, which is that it's best to do phonemic awareness with letters, believe it or not. Doesn't mean that you can't have fun manipulating sounds without letters, but if any of you are familiar with phonemic awareness, that's just something I want to put out there. But for those of you who aren't, what you want to be able to do is take fun manipulatives, and Montessori's great for this, right? You could take your wooden letters, you could take pebbles, skittles, whatever you'd like. And what you want to do is encourage your students or your kids to manipulate sounds, whether it's the beginning letter. So you'll see in this example, I might have, a student say, I'll bring down, for example, ch, munch. And I'll say, how can you turn munch into bunch? And then that process of them going, and bringing bringing the M away and then putting the B there, that is part of phonemic awareness. And we require this to read and spell. That process is needed. So you could do that with fun objects like this. You could do it with letters. But again, there will be more resources on ways you could do that at home too. And it's quite fun. It's such a great way to help students at all ages, truly. So my second last slide, I just want to briefly go over a couple of different benchmarks. So when it comes to reading and spelling, especially, as we're in this year, 2024, we've gone through this big pandemic. There's certainly a lot of information coming at us, a lot of demands coming at us, and things to consider for our kids. And so these are a couple quick things that are great to be working on. Also things to look out for to see if your kids can do, because believe it or not, when it comes to reading, there's a lot of other skills that can start to determine like how easy reading might initially be for your kid, which is really interesting. So directionality is one of them. So, helping your young kids with, left or right. Again, they don't have to be perfect, and they're not saying that they're not going to be great readers if they're struggling with that, but they're going to have to learn to read left to right, right? And so knowing where this is and where these directions go can be a great skill that might not be related to reading in the moment, but it's something to think about with those young ones. Same with the phonemic awareness, things like rhyming, nursery rhymes. That's something we want to get them having fun with. Same with knowing things like addresses, right? Of course, it's a safety thing too, but being able to memorize those, not just in preschool, but into elementary, is also important, because that is a working memory indicator, right? If they're able to hold on to that many pieces of information, that's something they're going to need when they're reading. So it doesn't mean, don't worry if they're struggling, or if you have a long address, that's okay. But again, something we want to work on, and it's actually going to be helpful when they get to that reading stage. Now, I just have 2 quick notes on elementary here. I want to really keep this quick, but learning to read is something that we typically associate with grades 1 to 3. And so that early elementary age is when they're starting to get that sense of what is reading, what is it like? They're working on sounding out those, consonant, vowel, consonants, CVC words like cat, right? Quite early on. And then they're moving into other syllable types. Again, those syllable types are the things that help us understand the difference between Tim and time, right? With that E, for example. They'll also start getting into 2-syllable words. These are things we want to try and encourage and work with our kids and their teachers to help them get to. Something you can do at home as well is getting those grade 1s to 3s working on the what we call the Fry or the Dolch lists. These are 2 people who've created their lists of the most common 100 words in English. Actually, the Fry lists can go up to the first 500, but these are great ones if you want to work with your kids and help kickstart them on recognizing those words accurately and fluently. So I encourage that at any age, but that's a good one to start in, grade 1. Not all 100 though. Don't stress them out. Then we have grade 4 to 6 is when we switch to the reading to learn. So from learning to read, then reading to learn. And so the strategies I've given so far can absolutely be used with grades 4 to 6. So those phonemic awareness skills, decodable books that target certain concepts, these are all totally great. And there's a lot of age appropriate stuff that still follows that science and that structure without feeling too babyish. So just something to consider though, that, when your kiddos get into grade 4 and up, that's usually when they're expected to start reading to actually answer questions, or reading for research, or reading to expand their knowledge. And so if they're still in that stage of learning to read, that's totally okay too. But we have to make sure that they're getting that down pat, right? Before we're expecting them to now read and then take information and then write about it. That becomes really complex. Anyway, for the sake of time, I will just try and end this off here. I just wanted to thank you guys so much again for all being here. I could probably talk to the cows come home about reading, but just the fact that you're all here is a fabulous sign that your kids are in really, really great hands. And I think that there's so much magic to be had, despite all the information there is to know. And just consider this a stepping point, and know that it is never too late to rewire our kids' brains or our own brains for reading too. So that's another really exciting fact. It's never too late. But anyway, I will end there, and I'll probably pass it back to Rebecca or to Anne for a Q&A if we have time.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Caitlin and I have already spent hours and hours geeking out on so much of this. And there's still like so much information here that I would love to talk about, but I'm going to instead be a good host. And I'm going to try to change my view here so I can see everybody. If you want to put a question in the chat, I'm happy to ask it for you if you prefer.
Yeah, that'd be great.
How do I? Otherwise, I can't change my view for some reason, but anybody who wants to just unmute yourself and hop in, because otherwise it will become the Anne and Caitlin show, and that's
Caitlin, do you want to keep your share screen up, or
I can take it down. Yeah, I was like, maybe I'll keep this up in case someone's like, well, what were you talking about? Anyway, it'll be in the recording, so I can take it off. Is that easier?
And then we can do gallery view, and maybe we can see everybody. And if anyone has any questions, they can raise their hand.
I have a question. So based on age, do you have a recommended reading list or books that we can get at home that are good for decoding phonics and supporting this sort of system? And before you answer, thank you so much for hosting this, High Park and Mildenhall, and Caitlin, for your time. This has been really helpful.
I'm so happy. No, sorry.
No, go.
Also, I'm remembering again that my figures are blue. I was tutoring right before this, and anyway, so that's just part and parcel. But anyway, so yes, fabulous question. So it is interesting because the age question, I will say it is easier to find earlier elementary, books that are rooted in the science of reading and that take on those earlier concepts. So there is a reading list that I'll actually send, but I will just off the top of my head say the Meg and Greg books. I'll actually type it as well. The Meg and Greg books are fabulous, and they are also sequential. I believe there's 4 or 5 of them out now, but it's in a series, but it's written as a bit of a comic. So the students don't actually end up using the pictures to guess. Like I was sort of saying before, the words are controlled, they're fun. It's these, 2 kids who are up to all sorts of things. So Meg and Greg is a great one. I have some grade 3 students who are obsessed, and I also have grade 1 students who love it too. So that's great. I'm sure grade 4 as well, especially if they're like kind of getting into reading more, then that's really great. And then another one would probably be there's this, I'm actually forgetting the name, but it's like a yak phonics book, and they also have a series on that's very sort of comic based, but they have a lot of decodable words that also follow a sequence that is very much rooted in the science of reading. And then there's a new series out right now that I will also be in the primer, but it is hilarious. It's like there's 3 comic books. One of them is about these pigs in a tub, and it is the most bizarre stuff that goes on in these stories. But the kids feel so empowered reading it because it looks like all the other books, right? That their peers are reading too, especially at a younger age. So I'm not sure what age. Oh, Veta, thank you. Meg and Greg are published in Canada. I didn't even know that. That's great. Anyway, so I think that those are fabulous places to start, especially if you're looking for something that's authentic and feels really fun and appropriate for that, I'd say early elementary age.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second, Caitlin, because I think the recommendation you made, I wanted to clarify with you a little bit, because we have parent-teacher interviews coming up. Actually, it's like well-timed next week. So what I understood you to say was, asking a question about where your individual child is in terms of, I don't know the right term, but like where they are with decoding, like what are they working on?
Yeah.
Which may be like simple, like very simple sounds, like letter recognition or, or more. And then you mentioned, like, I could Google that. Like I could say, my child is working on, I don't know how to Google that, but
yes.
decode AI, like decode
yeah.
like what would I Google? Because I think that is probably, to me, that seems more relevant than trying to find like a grade or an age, just because of the, like I had one child who didn't read until she was almost 8. I had another who read at 3. Like that would not have been age related for us.
Exactly. And actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's something I meant to say too, is that it's, with age, it is really interesting because there are differences, and there is a range in when students begin to read, and that's normal and that's fine. And so that's why, exactly as you say, Anne, I do recommend basing those choices on something concrete within the text. So something like a concept. And then within that, so let's say, I'm going to type it in the chat as well if you guys can see. But for example, if a student is working on really short 3-letter words, usually ones that we call consonant, vowel, consonant words. So those are words like cat, map, tin. That's a really commonplace. And I know, with Montessori as well, like as the students are learning more of their letter sounds, this is usually the next step that they'll start to get into, if I'm not mistaken. So what you can do then, if that's what you find out, oh, Billy's working on, these short vowel sounds, or working on CVC words, you can go in on Google and you can type in, for example, CVC, so it's consonant, vowel, consonant, decodable story. And you can type that in on Amazon, and I guarantee you a million of them will pop up, because this is a really, thankfully, a very common topic now. It's been really popping off. So there's great resources. But yeah, thank you. So that's what you would type in. Or if I may, just if there's a specific concept like AY and AI, like I said, right? Those long A sounds, you could say AI/AY decodable story.
Great.
And see where it goes. If you're in doubt, please feel free to email me. I actually don't even mind if we've never spoken, and just be like, is this legit? In my training, we actually had to go through and be like, yeah, this is a good one. And then, this is not. So for the most part, there's some great ones out there though. So I wouldn't worry. Yeah, librarians. Yes, Veta, thank you.
Veta, thank you.
Yeah, they're getting so well versed if they're not already really well versed in this too. Yeah. Awesome. Are there any other questions at all?
Yeah, anybody else?
Or comments? Or like,
Oh, I have so many.
I know it could go on, but I definitely want to be mindful. And I will say as well, you know, I'm really, really, truly happy to answer any questions. I will say, you know, Veta and Kara are fabulous resources as well. And there's probably more too, but I just know Kara and Veta very personally. And so they know a ton about this. So if your child is in one of those schools, Milden Hall or Taddle Creek, they're a great resource. But otherwise, I'll also pop in my email. And if you have any questions too, and that'll be in the primer. But yeah, so I can't say exactly what day to expect it, because I want to take some of the information from these comments as well to make sure I add them in. But yeah, everyone can expect at some point soon a list with more information. Yeah, and hopefully that's helpful too.
I mean, I will, you know, I mean, all of you who know me too, like I can't resist making the plug for Montessori. You know, and of course I have a preference, right? But you know, what I was really struck by is, you know, I think sometimes we don't even really appreciate the depth of the preparation that we are doing with our earliest students. So, you know, when you're mentioning, Caitlin, doing, you know, sort of any kind of exercise that is recognizing eye movement from left to right, or multisensory whole body, you know, that sort of, what did you say? Neurons that fire to get, like, it's so powerful because our youngest students do exercises that look like, so like they look like they're just about fine motor, right? So they're spooning beans from one little bowl to another little bowl. But the intention is that they are always doing that from a left to right organization, and for that exact reason, right? Like we're building this sort of orientation that we process left to right in our North American culture. In other cultures, in a Montessori school, you will find that they are spooning right to left because they're training to go, like, it's, you know, it's like, it's pretty incredible. So, you know, I think just sort of thinking about how the phonics is built in and the decoding is built in. You know, you mentioned our, you didn't call it this, but our movable alphabets, like where we've got all these letters that the children use. In the earliest stages, it's one letter, you know, and little objects. So which of these objects goes with the b for B, you know, and or the bug or the book.
Exactly.
It's just such a, it's just really cool to hear, you know, that the science has come back around to support this. You know, like it's, I mean, as a Montessori, you know, person, it's kind of gratifying.
It is,
you know, because it's like we have this sort of progressive thing, and I don't claim, it's not like children can't learn in other schools. Like I know that, like I'm not, you know, but I think, you know, I'm just always, I just love closing that loop, you know. And so again, for those of you who do have parent-teacher interviews this week, you know, I think having the opportunity to say what exercises, like if you know, if your child is 3, what exercises are they doing that is preparatory to reading? And, you know, like it's just such an entry into their classroom and into the work that they're doing already. And anyway, that's just the plug I'll make for all of you.
No, I love that. And if I may add on too, like this is so anecdotal, but something, yeah, I do notice with a lot of the Montessori kids, because I've been, you know, working, as you said, I've been working with some students right there at Taddle Creek, and I do notice just generally there is a greater willingness to take calculated risks with those kids.
Interesting.
The willing, yeah, and not fearing, not being as fearful. Like, whereas there are many students I've seen who are well and truly freaked out by reading, especially if we haven't done it in a way that works for their brain. And so, yeah, to see that is fabulous, because it just makes that entry into their world, into their mind, a lot easier, because they're willing and they know that there's, they can trust in the process.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And so that in and of itself, like the social emotional side, right, which I didn't touch on, which is nuts. I mean, there's so much to touch on, but the social emotional side is key as well. And so when we talk, right, as we always do, about, growth mindsets and encouraging our kids to be, to understand that everything's temporary, right? It's not that they don't know, it's they don't know yet.
Don't know, right.
Yet. Or they're working on it. And so that framing when it comes to reading as well is really key, because we want to keep them open to it, especially given that reading can be learned at any stage in life. So I say it to my high school students too, right? It's like, okay, but we'll get there. So that's just something to keep in mind. But I think Montessori does very well. Again, I work with students in public, private Montessori. And yeah, overall, I do find that extremely beneficial. So yeah, if you can keep that up at home, it's great. Yeah.
So, well, there you go, right? Like, we will do the Caitlin and Ann show, everybody. So, so if people don't have any questions right now, we will sort of call it a night with enormous gratitude, Caitlin. Like, it's so helpful, and I really appreciate the suggestions and the tips and recommendations. And I hope, people are feeling like they have something that they're going to try out, or like, just even noticing the books you're reading now. Like, how do you look at them differently now with this information? So, so tomorrow, Rebecca's just reminding me and all of us that tomorrow morning at Taddle Creek is our coffee morning. And it's, I'm going to be all fired up to talk about it. So bring in those questions, and, or if you have questions that you want to leave for Caitlin, and we'll just do like a little message thing. But yeah.
Love it. Yeah, please, everybody, let's keep the conversation.
Let's keep talking. It's so cool.
It is. There's some serious, amazing changes going on. So I'm really excited for you to see the primer and to keep on talking. And hopefully I get an email if someone wants to learn a little bit more about this or have questions. Like, I'm so happy to answer.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.